Koto Amatsukami. Koto Amatsukami simply existed, it was zero. One day, it decided to become one. It gave up a small part of itself to create the universe. Still lonely, it proceeded to use even more of itself to make stars and worlds. It made so many that itself could fit on one of those creations. It selected a world, now known as Earth, and made its home. Still alone, one day, it made a world-altering decision to split into two separate beings. The first, Izanagi, was a tall male with hair silver as the moonlight flowing around on its own will. His skin was pale and as cold as snow. His robe was also pure white, so bright it illuminated the ground around him. He was bestowed a sword that shone like pure light while maintaining a physical form. Izanagi had one wing on his right side, whose feathers were his brightest feature. The second being, Izanami, was a female, much shorter than Izanagi. As if in contrast with him, her hair was as dark as night and flowing to her bosom. Her skin was fair but had a darkness to it her counterpart lacked. Her form cast shadows on the ground behind her. She had a pale bucket, filled with the essence of creation itself. She had 3 wings on her left side, blackened by her own shadow. Izanagi and Izanami. Izanagi, having been formed from Koto Amatsukami, began acclimating to having a physical body. He looked towards his female counterpart and said, "You are." Izanami stared up at him and responded, "You are not me anymore." Izanagi looked down and exclaimed, "We. Us. You." The concept of company brought joyous cries upon their lips. Izanami looked at his sword and proclaimed, "That tool of yours must be used to destroy." She looked at her bucket, and I must be a creator. She dipped her hand inside the bucket carelessly and scooped up a handful of creation essence, an aqueous substance like that of water. She screamed in agony, as if the power of creation wasn't meant to be held, and the water fell to the earth. Without purpose, it quickly swallowed the world. Izanagi swung his sword, and the creation ceased. Izanami, ashamed, lowered her head to stare at her hand. "It hurts. Am I not strong enough to create something?" Izanagi cut his sleeve and tore it into 2 pieces. He used one piece to wrap her damaged hand, then tied the other to the end of his sword. He then dipped the blade into the bucket. Then he asked Izanami, "Will you place your hand on the sword?" Confused, she questioned his odd request. "Why?" "I'll just ruin the world if I attempt creation again," she said while shaking her head. He placed his hand on hers and replied, "Imagine we had a place to stand amongst the water, a world we created, a place of grand elegance. We can create it together. We created this universe, now, together, we shall create this world, our utopia." He placed her hand on the hilt together with his, and they pulled the sword from the bucket. A few drops from the tip of the blade hit the water, and from those minuscule droplets, a mass of land started to rise. Izanagi and Izanami descended there gracefully from the sky. Their feet planted firmly on the ground they had just formed, and a smile crept upon Izanagi's face. "See? Together, we are strong enough to create." They spent many years sculpting the land, giving life to plants, making caves, rocks, mountains, trees, and so much more. At last, they crafted a palace in the sky from where they could view the world they had built. Izanami looked at the bucket and said, "There is still so much left for our utopia. I think it's time now." Izanagi smiled, and responded, "Then let life begin." Kamikaze. It was time for life to begin. "Here I go," Izanagi exclaimed with his right hand on his sword. "Izanami, could you pour some creation onto my sword once more?" "Of course," said Izanami, understanding what he was about to do. "Now, pour some onto my left hand," Izanagi asked. "But, it will burn you as it did me," she protested. "Just do it," Izanagi demanded in a harsher tone. Izanami obliged unwillingly, and Izanagi's hand sizzled, but he endured the scorching power of creation. He squeezed his left hand closed with divine strength, and then he slowly opened it to reveal a bright light radiating from his palm. He shot the beam of light into his sword. It began to glow, and a fissure formed in the blade. He threw it into the air, and the light created a sphere that enveloped his sword and continued to grow until it could no more. Then, it burst with power. Izanami looked on in awe, witnessing the majesty of its light. The sphere began to condense and take the form of a figure. When the light dissipated, what was left was a man in bright diamond armor, who wielded a long thin curved katana. The blade shone brightly as if made of the highest quality of diamond. It was as long as Izanagi, and the handle was as long as his arm. This man's hair was opaque compared to that of Izanagi, but it was just as long. Izanagi looked on at his new creation, and saw a divine feather fall from the sky. This man of light also had his wing. He descended to the ground before Izanagi and Izanami. "Kamikaze," exclaimed Izanagi, "my divine wind, the embodiment of my justice. I grant you the title of Kami, a divine title, and hereby grant you dominion of the sky. Rise, my son, and live well." Izanami remarked, "Izanagi, your ki has become so much weaker." "Why?" He looked down. "It took most of my power to craft perfection." Izanami snarled in jealousy, "If you think he is perfect, just wait until you see my perfect creation." Onakage. Izanami, with a revamped resolution never before seen, readied herself. She bore witness to the process and sacrifice Izanagi had made to create Kamikaze, his justice. She had resolved to do better than him. "If he created perfection, I shall create a being beyond that, a being that will be an awesome sight. A true majesty to behold. I care not about what it will cost me. This shall be my masterpiece." Her thoughts were only set on surpassing the miracle she had just witnessed. She levitated the bucket as she unwrapped her injured right hand. Without hesitation, she plunged both hands into the water. They sizzled and cracked as the power of creation burned her flesh. She removed her hand then, quickly cradling a pool of water, and proceeded to pour it over her head. As it ran down her body, it burned and warped her flesh into a grotesque figure. She concentrated and used the steam coming from her corrupted skin, and mixing it with most of her ki, she forged a small black sphere in the center of her being. In horror, Izanagi gazed as she was rendered hollow. She was the most beautiful thing that had ever existed, and she has forsaken that and deformed and mangled herself to make this. I think this alone has made her more beautiful than ever. His mind raced, wondering what form would come from this sacrifice. The sphere was ready and ejected itself from her body, crashing to the ground. It had grown in size, and now began ascending towards the Kamui. It cracked halfway, and from it, a small shape emerged, no taller than Izanagi's waist. So menacing and ominous, it giggled before clapping its hands. From there, a purple sphere covered its body, almost a shell for metamorphosis. After a moment, the purple orb faded away, revealing its true form. It stood before them, with monstrous height. The figure was pure black, to the point where its body rejected light. It had 2 horns atop its head, and 3 red eyes. A purple mask covered most of the face, only leaving an impossibly snide grin revealed. His skin looked like remarkable quality leather. He had 4 upper extremities, 2 wings, long arms with long sharp fingers, and wielded 7 branched swords in his left hand. "Onakage," yelled Izanami, "my son, born in shadow. The greatest shadow to ever live. A marvel to the world. The one above all. I grant you the title Oni, and give you the ground as your domicile. Beyond the light perfection, you are my greatest pride." Onakage took a knee. "Thank you, my precious mother," he said as a grin crept upon her burned face. She then collapsed with her grin only growing larger and larger, falling into a burst of hysterical laughter. "Annika!" Izanagi rushed to her aid, but before he had a chance, Onakage had already caught her. Why did you push yourself so hard? You're a shell of the former you. You used so much more ki than I, Izanagi asked her. Kamikaze began concentrating his ki. I think I can help her, using your creation method. Izanagi looked at him in confusion, but nodded in approval, wanting to see how far his creation could go. A silhouette formed from Kamikaze's ki which soon achieved the shape of a tree. The first tree. From the top branch, a single fruit was born. Kamikaze flew up in a hurry and plucked the fruit of ki. He brought it to Izanami and instructed, "Eat this, please." As she did, wooden flesh began to fill the hollow void in the center of her body left from her creation. Many of her burns healed along with the void. Izanagi wrapped her remaining wounds. Onakage removed his mask and shrank to normal size. He then tied it to his waist. "Are you okay, mother?" a voice from behind them spoke. They turned to the tree. Two giant eyes had grown in its center, with two massive branches that resembled arms, and the ground cracked to reveal its roots had morphed into two legs. Izanagi, amazed, asked, "Are you one of us?" The tree responded, "I am a piece of Kamikaze, and thus, a piece of you." Fantastic. You hear that, Izanami? We have a third son. I hereby name you Sudowoodo, and as a part of me, grant you the title of Kami. Onakage, unwilling to be outdone, formed a ball of ki in his right hand as well. He created a purple orb of darkness in his left one and threw it on the ground, forming a small crater. He then placed his ki in the hole and snapped his fingers. From the hole, a giant stone bowl emerged. I, Onakage, have gracefully granted you existence. You are a part of me, and thus a part of Mother. Izanami stepped forward. I shall name you San-nin, the stone Oni. Izanagi, excited, asked, Oni, Kami, what should we call ourselves then? He put his hand to hers and exclaimed, Onika. Life. Soon the number of Onika grew. San-nin would shape the land. Sudowoodo would oversee the growth of trees. Tsunami would control them. Mizwa would govern water currents. Bankeis would rule the skies. Hokage controlled fire. Susanoo was named king of the sea and storms. Amaterasu would rule the sun. Tsukuyomi would govern the moon. Rintu, a beast of pure rage, was however imprisoned in the earth's core for fear of his power. Reijiki was to control thunder, but his power was extraordinary, and he could absorb ki from the air around him. In fear of his power yet again, he was sealed as well, and Reikage was given the governance of thunder. Hikari would light the days with his radiance. Yami would provide a veil of darkness at night. Many more Onika were created over the years, many of them without a function. Izanagi and Izanami watched from Kamui for ages as they would create several kinds of animals and distribute them across the world. Izanagi was approaching the level of Izanami. None of this is life, though, Izanagi said in disappointment. Confused, Izanami asked, what do you mean by that? We exist on two different planes. Here, with our physical bodies, and on another plane far from here. In this ki plane, we exist as ki only. However, if anything happens to our physical form, we automatically reform from here. I've seen it many times. Orochi and Susanoo constantly clash and destroy one another only to regenerate, as do Amaterasu and Tsukuyomi. So many others as well, they are eternal. But life is finite, precise, temporary. In agitation, Izanami retorted, what of the animals? When tsunami consumes fish, they cease to exist. Izanagi responded, beasts are not life, they are only of this physical plane. I have barely any ki to spare, and my sword is nearly broken, but I must make one more attempt at life. Humanity. Izanagi knew there were only a few drops of creation remaining. The brunt of his final creation would rely heavily upon his ki. He drew his sword, and Izanami dripped some creation onto it. He poured much ki into his sword. Izanagi flew down from Kamui and planted his sword into the ground. As he focused the ki in the blade, it began to crack and break. He formed a perfect ball, and the blade shattered, never to be used again. That would be the last attempt. A form emerged from the ball. It was different, it looked similar to Izanagi. Two purple eyes with long black hair became visible. He was bare, with no clothes nor wings nor a sword. Weaker than the Onika. Izanagi crafted a robe and presented it to him. You are my simplest creation, yet I feel you have more potential than any Onika. You will need to feed on the flesh of beasts and the plants of the land. You must drink its water to survive. If your body is damaged, or you don't feed yourself, you will die. You will go to the ki plane as well if that happens, but you won't return. Because you are the first of your kind, I shall name you Ichiban. Ichiban covered himself in the robe and bowed. I shall make you proud, father. Izanagi, excited, murmured, I'm sure you shall. I shall provide you with a tool to help you gather food and protect yourself. He grabbed the broken remains of his sword and reformed it into a long wide blade as tall as Ichiban and as wide as his foot from toe to heel. He handed the blade to him. By this time, Izanami had also descended from Kamui. Izanagi, you overdid it. Fool, you are slightly weaker than me now. You didn't have to make him that strong. Here. I'll once more improve on your concept. Izanami looked to the bottom of her bucket, seeing only a few drops left. She poured a small amount of ki into it, then dropped 8 of them to the ground. 8 women were formed from those, all with only enough ki to exist, all with normal eyes. My simplest creations, I shall name you from left to right. Ni, San, Yan, Go, Roku, Nana, Hachi and Q. Take care of this simpleton. He may be strong, but he doesn't have the ability to think as you do. She then morphed her bucket into a bow and arrow and left it before them as a parting gift. Izanagi proclaimed, we shall be watching from Kamui. Take care of each other, and build this world as you see fit. We have huge expectations for you. They ascended to Kamui, smiling all the way. Months had passed. They had built houses and planted crops, and hunted animals. They had soon learned of fire and water. Eventually, Lady Nana's stomach started to grow visibly. Izanami asked her counterpart, what does it mean? Is she to die? Izanagi responded with, I am not sure. That isn't something I had taken into account. We must watch to see what happens and let their destiny be their own. A few months passed again, and in that time, Lady Ni and Lady Roku had also become pregnant. One day, Lady Nana shrieked in pain. They laid her down and watched over her, worried. After some time of agony, she gave birth to a baby boy. Ichiban named him Amana. He was so small he could be held in 2 hands. His eyes were black, and he was special. Izanagi and Izanami, surprised, looked on in awe. So they can reproduce just as the animals do. How interesting, Izanagi said. More time passed, and Lady Ni gave birth to a boy. He was named Shursui, and he had unique red eyes. Lady Roku too went into labor soon. However, this time something was wrong. Lady Roku gave birth to a girl they named Chiyo. But the color left her skin, and her blood left her body. Lady Roku had died. This was death. The humans gathered and all made comments on her life and personality. They dug a deep hole and laid her to rest. The feeling of loss was in the air, and Izanami looked down in dismay. So this is what you meant when you said life is finite. I understand it makes each of them so precious, the fact they will not remain forever. I know I could just visit her in the ki plane, but the fact is I will miss her here. Izanagi exclaimed, this is life. How truly wonderful. Half a millennium passed, and in that time, Amana, with his own family, had left to make a new city. Shursui had done the same. From those, many more cities had formed, and now humans numbered in the thousands. Ichiban was named King of Humanity, and all seemed well. But deep underground, Onikage was watching jealously. A smirk had crept upon his face as he had smashed his way to the surface.